Cooperation on different forms of prosecution is one of the reasons I'm here, and I've been meeting with people in the Department of Justice, including the FBI, to talk about how we share intelligence, how we share information, to make sure that we're enabling each other. Because, as Nate mentioned, as you mentioned, we do have different talents, right? And we are doing different things to different levels of success.
Yeah.
And so areas where you're able to advance an end state is certainly very welcome.
And BBI?
The BBIs and BBI and USBI, yes. I mean, that's, those areas of cooperation are absolutely essential. Thank you very much. It's a very kind welcome, and I'm very grateful for the privilege of speaking to you this morning. It's a huge honour to be invited to Hudson because this group has grown from the days.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. Particularly important.
We're all being greeted. Greeted by an electronic voice, which I hope is not sent by Beijing. But look, it's a huge pleasure to be here with you because this institution has led much of the conservative debate on what affects so many of us today, on a global policy that actually isn't about the globe, but is about us here at home, here in the United States, here in the United Kingdom, for me. And as a son of Kent, I have to say it's always been a touch ironic that coming here to the United States always feels like coming home. For me, it's a bit more though than a spiritual home. It's a home that has really shaped so much of my own thinking. It shaped it because from institutions, from organisations not very far from here, orders and decisions have been taken that have seen me deploy on operations. But it's also shaped me very much because my godfather was a priest in this community, is a priest in this community, forgive me, I'm seeing him later. And he's been ministering to people here for a long time. Now, of course, I am a minister, but my king is very much of this world, divided into the rule of law that stands higher than any one individual or the state, that in our revolution of the 17th century put the people above the king and made everybody subject to the same law. They are the free market on which all our livelihoods depend. They are the schools and universities in which academic freedom and individual ideas can be championed, tested, and the rigour of debate can expose those that are resilient. And of course they are democratic norms and institutions themselves. These are the inheritance that we share and the foundation of our kinship, objects of admiration and envy around the world, and they are worth defending. Or Russia, where the legal vacuum that communism truly is, produced an oligarchy run by gangsters as a party's secure elite enrich themselves at the expense of the people. The mistake that many of us made over the past few decades is to believe that the principles underpinning our societies would sell themselves. We reached out, we were open, and we were supportive, but they weren't buying. Some believed that by welcoming the Russian oligarchs and the super wealthy, we could remake them in our image, that as they came to enjoy the riches of our free, open, and democratic societies, they would seek to emulate them at home. That in learning the manners of our schools and our courts, they would inhale our values and laws. And so successive governments turned a blind eye to Moscow's gold, the proceeds of Kremlin-backed corruption, which poured into the West after the fall of the USSR, and countries like ours became a playground for this new global elite. They came to London to enjoy luxury shopping and our rich cultural heritage. They bought houses and sent their children to our schools. We failed to pay sufficient attention to their integrity and the source of their funds, and turned a blind eye to their growing influence. Too many continue to support leaders and institutions at home that sought to undermine the principles and institutions on which our freedoms depend. In short, by welcoming those post-Soviet kleptocrats, we enabled Putin's regime. By taking their money, we allowed them to pillage their own country, knowing that their families and their wealth was safe in ours. And now that is coming home to us. the insecurity caused by Putin's greed and the need to sustain his violent regime has turned it, as so often happens, from a centre of crime to an exporter of violence. It is not just the Russian people who are suffering now, but Ukrainians, Georgians, and many, many more, as we all know that if we fail to hold the line in the east, it will come west. In short, we were naive. We prioritised wealth over security. Instead of chasing Benjamins, we should have borrowed from Franklin. Those who would give up essential security to purchase a little prosperity deserve neither security nor prosperity. This is the unhappy position that many have found themselves in. Despite warnings by many, including many in this room, they chose cheap energy, forgetting that pipelines bind both ways and that cheap goods cheapen their resilience. That didn't come without cost. Now sadly, none of this was unforeseeable. In fact, much of it was not only foreseen but predicted, and many of us tried to sound the alarm over Nord Stream, over Huawei, and over Londongrad. I spent 5 years as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in London, calling out the egregious abuses of our economy and society by malign states. Because foreign policy isn't about foreigners, it's about us. It's about how we shape the world toward the arc of liberty and the defence of our interests. Our 2018 report on Britain's links to dirty money was called Moscow's Gold. It clearly set out the threat that Russian corruption posed to the United Kingdom. Now, I'm not just referring to the ways in which this corruption has created potential new sources for leverage for Russia to exploit, or how it was enabled, or how it has enabled our enemies to fund hostile actions against us, but to the pernicious and corrosive effect it has on our democracy and on our society. For too long, the poison has been allowed to flow, and I am committed to stopping it. Prime Minister Sunak has made clear it will not be allowed to continue. I agreed to step down as chair of the committee and take this job because across the Western world, governments are finally recognising the scale of the threats that we all face, and there is finally an opportunity to do something about it. Since February last year, the United Kingdom's government has sanctioned over 1,200 individuals, including more than 130 oligarchs and their family members linked to the Russian state, freezing more than £18 billion of Russian finance in the United Kingdom. And there's more to come. We set up the Combating Kleptocracy Cell in the fantastic National Crime Agency, tasked with rooting out corrupt elites and their assets in the United Kingdom. The cell has successfully targeted houses, yachts, planes, and much more around the world, and brought enforcement action against professional enablers, such as unscrupulous accountants and lawyers who sell their nations cheaply for 30 pieces of silver. We introduced 2 key pieces of legislation to deliver sanctions more effectively. Seize suspect crypto assets more quickly, and unmask shadowy beneficial owners who hide behind layers of shell companies. And, together with you here in the United States, we are leading the global hunt for Putin's cronies and their ill-gotten assets through the Russian elites, proxies and oligarchs task force, which has blocked or frozen more than $30 billion worth of sanctioned Russian assets in financial accounts and economic resources. Despite these significant strides, we cannot be complacent. My brilliant and determined officials in the Home Office are drawing up the successors to the Economic Crime Plan and the Anti-Corruption Strategy, which will further detail the UK's response to tackling kleptocracy at home and abroad. And through the new economic crime levy, law enforcement agencies will receive hundreds of millions of pounds of new funding to tackle dirty money. But Russia is not alone in hiding wealth overseas. We all know about the oligarchs, but there are other princelings, red princelings, in our society whose states are undermining our freedoms. Many despotic regimes have used our laws to keep their money from the hands of those it is stolen from. And we must go from freezing to seizing and look hard at what we can do to help them get it back. Corruption and kleptocracy will never be welcome on our shores. Londongrad is closed. It is a pleasure to work with the dedicated teams here in the United States and elsewhere who are committed to this just as we are. Not just because of what it does to others, but what it does to us. Just yesterday, we announced a new round of sanctions against Russian cybercriminals who use ransomware to target hospitals and schools. That's not just an attack on institutions, but an attack on our people. Operations delayed and the exams disrupted. Illicit finance enables that ransomware. It opens paths to profit for criminal gangs and allows hostile actors vectors of violence against us all. It uses binary code to undermine family life. Illicit finance is one of the many tools employed by our adversaries to undermine our democracy and society. In the past, the Security Minister's job has focused more on counter-terrorism than state threats, and my predecessors were rightly more focused on al-Baghdadi than on Beijing. That's changed. As systematic competition intensifies, authoritarian regimes around the world are beginning to deploy increasingly aggressive tactics against the British and American people. The threats posed by malign states now take many different forms, including espionage, as we've seen reported in your country over the past week, interference, sabotage, and attempts to undermine the rules-based international system. And the tactics they use can be acute, such as Iran's attempts to kidnap or kill British and UK-based individuals, or chronic, as with China's attempt to play the long game by co-opting and influencing parliamentarians and other public servants. And as we are seeing in the news these days, they are evolving and they are rising. That brings me to foreign influence. The UK and her allies face an increasing range of threats from foreign states who are actively seeking to disrupt our political system and interfere with our democracy, our rights, and our freedoms. Efforts to interfere in our academic freedoms in universities are not new, but we have been taking steps now to protect our institutions. This isn't just about protecting British citizens. It is about protecting all those who live in the United Kingdom. Because part of the appeal of coming to the UK or the US to study is the opportunity to enjoy the freedoms many of us come to take for granted. But today, illegal police stations operating our countries are just one example of the transnational repression that we are seeing. I'll take them alone. I've asked for a comprehensive review of the UK's approach to transnational repression to ensure that we fully understand the threat and to maximise our ability to address this unacceptable behaviour. I look forward to working with Five Eyes, NATO, European and other friends to see what we can do together. Now let's be clear what this is for. We're here to defend democracy, a system of challenge and debate that depends on freedom of thought and expression, not just on polls and politicians. This review will form part of a new Defending Democracy task force the Prime Minister asked me to set up. And we are working to protect the UK's democratic processes, institutions and society, and to deliver a secure and resilient UK, free from threats of foreign interference. That means ensuring that we are able to respond to a range of threats, including foreign interference in electoral processes, our public offices and universities, disinformation, physical threats, and those in cyberspace. We are joining up our efforts across government and the UK intelligence community and working with our partners in Parliament, the devolved administrations, local government, the private sector and civil society. Our aim is to build resilience across all levels of the system. Our security demands a rethink. From local to general elections, from town halls to the Palace of Westminster, our democratic processes and institutions are an essential part of what it means to live in a free and open society. They must be preserved and safeguarded at all costs. As politicians, Marines, journalists, academics and business people, we can't give our nations eternal life, but we can guard the watch that we are on. And I'm reminded, again, of everyone's favourite bedtime reading, that US Army Field Manual we all hold so dear. It is the duty of every soldier to do one thing every day to improve our defensive position. Now today, on our watch, we have the tools, the plans and the friends to defend ourselves and support our allies. I look forward to working with many of you here in the United States and around the world to guard our